Hello, everyone. I'm Mark Vena, CEO and Principal Analyst at SmartTech Research, and welcome to another SmartTechCheck EduSeries episode. Today, we're taking a deep dive into Qualcomm's Investor Day 2026. Now, fair warning, this wasn't your typical one-hour investor presentation. Qualcomm's executive team spent more than 3 hours outlining its vision for the future. In fact, the presentations lasted longer than the upcoming movie, The Odyssey. Personally, I found Qualcomm's presentation considerably more entertaining, although perhaps I'm a bit biased as a technology analyst. Needless to say, there's no practical way to cover every product announcement, every architectural deep dive, and every financial metric in a single episode. Instead, I'd like to focus on what I believe are the most important strategic messages that emerge throughout the day and explain why I think this event represents a pivotal moment in Qualcomm's history. The tone was noticeable from the opening remarks. Cristiano Amon didn't present Qualcomm as a company making incremental improvements to existing products. He presented Qualcomm as a company positioning itself for what it believes will be the next era of computing. AI wasn't discussed as another feature or another business unit. It was presented as the common architectural foundation that now connects smartphones, PCs, automotive systems, industrial devices, robotics, edge computing, and increasingly, hyperscale data centers. One phrase kept coming to mind as I listened throughout the day. This simply isn't the Qualcomm many people still think of as the company behind smartphone processors. Management was making the case that Qualcomm is becoming a full-stack AI platform company. Whether that transformation ultimately succeeds will depend on execution over the next several years, but the strategic direction was remarkably clear and consistently reinforced by every executive who took the stage. That broader transformation sets the stage for everything else we'll discuss throughout this presentation. Before diving into Dragonfly and Qualcomm's new AI infrastructure portfolio, it's important to understand why this Investor Day felt different from previous years. Historically, Qualcomm presentations centered around smartphones, wireless leadership, and connectivity. Those businesses remain incredibly important, but this year they became part of a much larger story. Cristiano Amon repeatedly described AI as the unifying technology across virtually every market Qualcomm serves. Rather than viewing smartphones, automotive, PCs, networking, and industrial IoT as separate businesses, Qualcomm increasingly views them as different endpoints running the same AI-first architecture. One of the concepts that resonated with me was Qualcomm's description of the compute continuum. The company believes intelligence will increasingly be distributed across personal devices, enterprise infrastructure, edge servers, and hyperscale cloud environments. That philosophy explains why Qualcomm now sees opportunity extending from Snapdragon-powered mobile devices all the way to Dragonfly-powered AI infrastructure. Another important takeaway was Qualcomm's emphasis on diversification. Throughout the presentations, executives consistently reinforced that the company is reducing its historical dependence on handset revenue. Instead, future growth is expected to come from multiple engines, including automotive, industrial IoT, robotics, PCs, AI infrastructure, and enterprise computing. That diversification strategy becomes much more meaningful later in the presentation when Qualcomm updated its long-term financial outlook. Those revised projections weren't simply optimistic forecasts. They represented management's confidence that this broader AI strategy is already beginning to reshape the company's business mix. With that foundation established, let's turn to what was arguably the most important announcement of the day: Dragonfly and Qualcomm's formal entry into AI infrastructure. Dragonfly was undoubtedly the centerpiece of Investor Day, and in my opinion, the announcement that best illustrates how dramatically Qualcomm's strategy has evolved. Rather than introducing a single processor or accelerator, Qualcomm introduced Dragonfly as an AI infrastructure portfolio. That distinction is important. The portfolio includes CPUs, AI accelerators, networking technologies, and software designed to work together as an integrated platform. Qualcomm is no longer approaching the market as a component supplier. It wants to become a platform provider. Cristiano Amon described AI inference as one of the largest opportunities in computing over the next decade. Qualcomm's belief is that as AI becomes embedded in virtually every application and every connected device, inference will become a significantly larger market than many investors appreciate today. Dragonfly has been architected specifically around that opportunity. Another executive who played an important role throughout the day was Tony Pialis, Senior Vice President and General Manager of Qualcomm's data center business. Tony emphasized that enterprise customers increasingly care less about benchmark numbers and far more about the economics of deploying AI at scale. That means performance per watt, infrastructure utilization, and total cost of ownership become critical buying criteria. That message surfaced repeatedly throughout the presentations. Qualcomm isn't attempting to build the biggest processor or the fastest benchmark. It's attempting to build infrastructure that delivers the greatest business value for customers operating AI workloads around the clock. I also thought Qualcomm made an important strategic decision by introducing Dragonfly as a distinct brand, rather than extending the Snapdragon name into the data center. It signals that management views AI infrastructure as a long-term business with its own identity and its own roadmap. For Qualcomm, Dragonfly isn't another product launch. It's the company's formal entrance into one of the fastest growing segments of the semiconductor industry. One of the most interesting discussions throughout Investor Day centered on Agentic AI, because Qualcomm wasn't simply talking about larger language models. It was talking about how AI workloads themselves are fundamentally changing. Cristiano Amon argued that we're moving beyond simple prompt and response interactions toward AI systems that reason, plan, collaborate, and execute multi-step tasks autonomously. Those AI agents generate significantly more inference requests than today's chatbot interactions. In other words, future AI infrastructure won't simply process more data, it will process dramatically more decisions. That shift has profound implications for semiconductor design. Historically, much of the industry focused on maximizing raw compute performance, measured in floating point operations, or FLOPs. Qualcomm believes the more meaningful metric going forward will increasingly become tokens per watt. That's a measure of how efficiently an AI platform generates useful work while minimizing power consumption. This is where Qualcomm believes decades of designing highly efficient mobile processors become a competitive advantage. The engineering discipline required to optimize smartphones for battery life translates surprisingly well to designing efficient AI infrastructure. I thought Qualcomm made a compelling argument that the next phase of AI competition won't necessarily be won by the company with the largest processor. It may well be won by the company that enables customers to deploy AI at the lowest operating cost while maintaining high throughput and predictable performance. Whether that thesis ultimately proves correct remains to be seen, but Qualcomm presented a thoughtful and economically grounded framework that differs meaningfully from many of today's AI infrastructure narratives. That philosophy also leads directly into Qualcomm's next major innovation, high-bandwidth compute, which attempts to address one of AI's most significant technical bottlenecks, moving data efficiently between memory and compute. One of the more technical announcements during Investor Day may ultimately prove to be one of the most important. Qualcomm introduced what it calls High Bandwidth Compute, or HBC, a new architecture designed to address one of AI's biggest performance bottlenecks, moving data between compute and memory. As AI models become larger and inference workloads become more sophisticated, processors increasingly spend time waiting for data rather than performing computation. Qualcomm believes that simply adding more compute no longer solves the problem. Instead, the company is rethinking the relationship between processing and memory by placing them much closer together. Tony Pialis described high-bandwidth compute as a purpose-built near-memory computing architecture designed to reduce data movement, improve throughput, and lower energy consumption. Those aren't just engineering improvements, they have direct business implications. Every watt saved reduces operating costs. Every improvement in throughput increases utilization. And every reduction in latency improves the responsiveness of AI applications. Throughout Investor Day, Qualcomm repeatedly returned to one idea. The future of AI infrastructure isn't about isolated components. It's about optimizing the entire system. High-bandwidth compute reflects that philosophy by addressing a system-level challenge rather than simply introducing another faster processor. I also appreciated that Qualcomm discussed this technology within the context of a multi-generation roadmap. Management wasn't presenting HBC as a one-time innovation. It was positioning it as a foundational technology that will continue evolving alongside future Dragonfly products. If Qualcomm executes successfully, high bandwidth compute could become one of the architectural innovations that differentiates its AI infrastructure portfolio over the coming decade. Rather than competing solely on raw performance, Qualcomm is attempting to compete on efficiency, scalability, and economics. That's a consistent message we heard throughout the entire Investor Day. If Dragonfly represented Qualcomm's biggest hardware announcement, the acquisition of Modular may have been its most strategically important software announcement. For years, Qualcomm has been recognized primarily for its silicon leadership. Investor Day demonstrated that management increasingly believes software will determine which AI platforms ultimately succeed. That thinking explains the acquisition of Modular and its AI-native software stack. Cristiano Amon described the transaction as an important step in Qualcomm's evolution toward becoming a developer-first AI solutions company. Modular's technology enables developers to build AI applications once and deploy them efficiently across CPUs, GPUs, NPUs, and custom accelerators without extensive rewrites. In a world where AI infrastructure is becoming increasingly heterogeneous, that flexibility could become a meaningful competitive advantage. Chris Lattner, Modular's co-founder and CEO, reinforced that vision by emphasizing the need for a more open and efficient software foundation capable of spanning diverse hardware environments. That message aligns closely with Qualcomm's broader strategy of creating an open AI ecosystem rather than locking customers into proprietary architectures. What I found particularly interesting was Qualcomm's decision to emphasize openness throughout the presentation. Rather than suggesting customers should standardize on one architecture, management acknowledged that future AI deployments will almost certainly involve multiple processor types working together. Qualcomm wants its software to become the layer that simplifies that complexity. From my perspective, this acquisition changes how investors should evaluate Qualcomm. The company is no longer simply designing chips. It's assembling an AI platform that combines hardware, software, developer tools, and ecosystem partnerships. That's a much broader value proposition, and one that should generate higher strategic value over time if Qualcomm executes successfully. If there was one announcement that immediately validated Qualcomm's ambitions in the data center, it was the company's strategic partnership with Meta. Building world-class silicon is one thing. Convincing one of the world's largest hyperscale operators to deploy it is something entirely different. Qualcomm announced a multi-generation agreement under which the Dragonfly C1000 CPU is expected to power future generations of Meta's server infrastructure beginning in the second half of 2028. That's a significant endorsement for a company entering a market traditionally dominated by long-established competitors. Cristiano Amon described the agreement as validation of Qualcomm's approach to delivering leading performance per core while emphasizing breakthrough power efficiency for large-scale deployments. Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg reinforced that confidence, saying the company is excited to continue partnering with Qualcomm Technologies as Meta builds the infrastructure required to support what he described as personal superintelligence. I think that's an important point. This wasn't presented as a proof of concept or a limited pilot program. Qualcomm characterized it as a multi-generation roadmap, which sends a strong message to the rest of the industry. Hyperscale customers rarely commit to long-term partnerships unless they believe the supplier has both the technology and the execution capability to deliver over multiple product cycles. For Qualcomm, the Meta announcement provides far more than future revenue potential. It establishes credibility. Every enterprise customer and every cloud provider evaluating Dragonfly will inevitably take notice that Meta has already committed to the platform. That's exactly the kind of customer validation Qualcomm needed as it enters one of the most competitive markets in technology. While much of Investor Day focused on AI infrastructure, Qualcomm made it equally clear that the company's long-term vision extends far beyond the data center. Throughout the presentations, executives repeatedly discussed what they called physical AI. In practical terms, that's AI operating in the real world through vehicles, industrial equipment, autonomous robots, drones, and intelligent edge systems. Qualcomm believes this represents the next major phase of AI adoption, where intelligence doesn't simply generate text or images, but interacts with and responds to the physical environment. Nakul Dugal, who leads Qualcomm's automotive, industrial, embedded IoT, and robotics businesses, outlined how many of the technologies Qualcomm has already developed for mobile and automotive applications can now be applied across factories, warehouses, logistics networks, and robotics platforms. The common thread is efficient, always-on AI running at the edge. This is another example of Qualcomm leveraging existing strengths into adjacent markets. Rather than building separate architectures for every industry, the company is creating a common AI platform that can scale from a smartphone to an industrial robot to an autonomous vehicle. From my perspective, that's one of Qualcomm's greatest competitive advantages. Few semiconductor companies possess deep expertise in low-power computing, wireless connectivity, AI acceleration, automotive systems, and embedded computing simultaneously. If physical AI develops as Qualcomm anticipates, that breadth of experience could become increasingly valuable over the next decade. Investor Day concluded with perhaps the strongest statement of confidence management could make. Qualcomm significantly raised its long-term financial targets to reflect what it believes this broader AI strategy can deliver. The company increased its fiscal 2029 non-handset revenue target to approximately $40 billion, roughly double its previous target. It introduced a new data center revenue target of more than $15 billion by fiscal 2029. Automotive remains another major growth engine with a $65 billion design win pipeline, supporting a $10 billion revenue target. IoT is now expected to exceed $14 billion, driven by industrial AI, networking, and robotics. Perhaps the most telling statistic was this. Qualcomm expects handsets to represent only about one-third of QCT revenue by fiscal 2029. That's a remarkable change for a company whose identity has historically been so closely associated with smartphones. Cristiano Amon aptly summarized the strategy by saying Qualcomm is defining the company's next chapter, while accelerating its diversification strategy and evolving into a platform company. Those revised financial targets demonstrate that management isn't simply optimistic about the future. It's sufficiently confident to publicly raise its long-term expectations. As always, execution remains the key variable. These are ambitious targets, and the competitive landscape will remain intense. But Investor Day demonstrated that Qualcomm now has a much broader portfolio of growth opportunities than many investors may have appreciated only a few years ago. As we wrap up, let's step back and consider the broader implications of everything Qualcomm presented over those 3+ hours. First, Dragonfly officially establishes Qualcomm as a serious participant in AI infrastructure. Second, the acquisition of Modular demonstrates that Qualcomm recognizes software and developer ecosystems will be just as important as silicon. Third, the Meta partnership provides meaningful external validation of Qualcomm's strategy before its first-generation server CPU even reaches production. Fourth, Qualcomm is making a thoughtful argument that the future of AI infrastructure will increasingly be measured by efficiency, scalability, and total cost of ownership rather than peak benchmark performance alone. Whether you agree entirely with that premise or not, it's a differentiated strategy that plays directly to Qualcomm's historical strengths in low-power computing. Finally, Investor Day reinforced something I've been observing over the past several years. Qualcomm has quietly transformed itself into one of the semiconductor industry's most diversified companies. Smartphones remain important, but they're now part of a much larger portfolio that spans PCs, automotive, industrial IoT, networking, robotics, edge AI, and now hyperscale data centers. Thanks very much for watching this SmartTechCheck EduSeries episode. I hope you found this deep dive both informative and valuable. If you enjoyed this analysis, please take a moment to like the video, repost it within your professional network, and subscribe to the SmartTechCheck YouTube channel. Your support helps us continue producing independent, in-depth technology analysis like this. And finally, I'd love to hear from you. If there are technology companies, industry events, product launches, or emerging trends you'd like SmartTech Research to cover in a future EduSeries episode, please leave your suggestions in the comments below. Until next time, I'm Mark Vena. Thanks for watching.